Hey everybody, it's my great pleasure to have Jeff Dornik here today, and we're going to talk about the election. And let me say at the outset that today that we're recording is the Monday right before the election, so we don't know what's going to happen tomorrow or in the days to come, and we're doing our best to think about these matters and to imagine what we need to do to help our country. So I'm going to launch in my first question with you, Jeff, and thank you again for being here today. In a recent article, you said America's survival does not depend on Donald Trump. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, so and I always preface these kinds of conversations with the fact that I've been a Trump guy since 2012. I wanted him to run instead of Mitt Romney, going back all the way then. I had a brief time where I left Trump and I jumped over and I endorsed RFK Jr. And then obviously when Kennedy endorsed Trump, I came back into the fold with the MAGA crowd and America First World and all that kind of stuff. But my principles have never changed, and the way that I've always looked at everything is that I supported Donald Trump and I am supporting Donald Trump now, not because of who he is or because he's Trump or anything like that, but because of I'm starting with my principles first and I'm figuring out which candidate and which person most aligns with my principles. And Donald Trump, for the vast majority of the issues, does align with my worldview and outlook on life and all of that. Now, when it comes to the aftermath of an election that's been as contentious and crazy and over the top as this one, obviously I've got insane amount of concerns when it comes to Kamala Harris. I think Kamala Harris is about as anti-American, anti-constitutional, anti-freedom, anti-liberty as you can possibly get out of pretty much any presidential candidate we probably ever had. With that said, there's a lot of rhetoric saying, if Kamala Harris goes in the White House and Donald Trump doesn't get in, then we're going to see the end of America. And I used to believe that as well. With that, but then I take a step back and I realize that America is an idea about a common principle that's found in the Constitution of the United States. And we are a self-governing society, which means that things only happen within the government by our consent. Yes, there's corruption. Yes, there's rogue intelligence agencies. Yes, politicians do horrific things. But at the same time, it what they do only happens by our consent because we are a self-governed society, and that's evidenced by the fact that the government and these rogue establishment powers that be have to propagandize us. They have to push propaganda. They have to push lies. They have to get us to believe the false narratives that they're pushing in order for them to get away with things. So the only way that, if Kamala Harris is going in the White House, come January, the only way that she does ultimately destroy this country is if we consent to it by our apathy, by not pushing back, by not doing what we need to do. Because the reality of it is, it doesn't matter who is president of the United States. They alone cannot save the country. They alone cannot destroy the country. That hinges upon us as we the people.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And it sounded like from the article that you wrote that the true enemy is complacency. Why is the true enemy complacency?
Well, because when you think about it, I always say either complacency or apathy. Those are the two words that I'll use a lot, and a lot of that really comes back to the fact that we have politicians and we have elected officials and bureaucrats and agencies and the whole deal that do things that are wildly unconstitutional, that violate our constitutional rights left and right. And we may go onto Twitter and complain about it,
Hmm.
but what are we actually doing in order to make sure that it doesn't happen? Because, for example, a whole lot of us after the 2020 election had a lot of concerns about, whether the election results were legitimate. Was it rigged? Did something bad happen? What is it, outside sources on this? Is it inside sources? What actually happened here? And in all reality, there was actually not a whole lot that was done between 2020 and 2024 in order to fix a lot of those concerns. And a lot of this is because we go around, we'll pay money to buy books, we'll show up at conferences, we'll listen to podcasts, we'll hop on Twitter and complain and make memes and videos and the whole deal. But when it comes to actual things that need to happen, like organizing and proposing legislation and holding our elected officials accountable, all of a sudden it's like we don't have time for that. We have time for all these other peripheral things. We don't have time to do what we actually need to do to fix these problems. And that's where I always come back to it It comes down to complacency and apathy. It's great when we're sitting behind a keyboard, but it's a lot more difficult. And for whatever reason, people are a lot more apathetic when it comes to getting off the butt and showing up to their city council meeting or their county board of supervisors, or showing up to a protest outside their state capitol or something like that. Like, we need to actually get off our butts and do something, not just sit around tweeting about it.
I couldn't agree more. I say that all the time, and I totally hear what you're saying right there. Um, I I wrote an article not long ago for Substack saying the exact kind of thing, right? It's very easy to publish memes and to feel like you're doing some sort of activism by writing something on social media, but that will not fix the problem. So let me ask you this: where do you think that complacency, that apathy comes from?
I think that we've been lulled into the sense of apathy by politicians that have campaigned and run on on the claim that I will fight for you, I will do this for you,
Yep.
and and again, as great as Donald Trump has been on a wide variety of issues, he also campaigned on that. He's like, it basically got a whole host of people to believe that Donald Trump is going to save America, and I'm sorry, if Donald Trump is going to the White House, great. But at the same time, he is not going to save America. He is the point of the spear. Sure, he's going to be doing certain things and setting up the infrastructure to where we can save the country. At the same time, that comes down to us. It comes down to we the people. And I always use this. I always use this example. Let's say Donald Trump gets into the White House and he does everything that everybody in the MAGA base wants him to do. He goes around, he rounds up all the criminals, he arrests Hillary Clinton, Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, sends them down to Gitmo, prosecutes them from treason, the whole deal, right? Like all everybody's wish list. Let's say he accomplishes all that. You still have half the country that thinks he's Adolf Hitler incarnate. When you actually think about it, that's where we need to actually get in the game and have tough conversations with our friends and family and people around us, and begin to ask pointed questions to get people to rethink their positions. What do you actually believe about taxes? What do you actually believe about the role of the government? What do you actually believe about immigration and illegal immigration? And ask these questions, not just yelling at people or spouting information like a fire hose and blasting them with everything. It's get them to rethink what they actually believe, because I can tell you the vast majority of Americans are much more conservative than I think that they give themselves credit for when you actually push them on a lot of these hot button issues. And I think that, but that still comes back to this idea that we cannot treat elected officials and politicians as if they are the ones that are going to do things. They are there to represent us. Our founding fathers established this country in a representative form of government where we elect representatives to go and represent us and do our bidding in whether it's the state capitol, the nation's capital, or things along those lines. But for whatever reason, we've inverted all that to where it's like we elect people and then they go do their thing and then we have to submit to them. No, it's supposed to be the other way around. The highest form of government in this country, according to our founding fathers, is the individual. And every single step that you get closer to Washington, D.C. is lower on the totem pole. But we've inverted that to where that's the highest point on the totem pole and the individual is the lowest. But that comes by our own apathy and our own consent because we've played along with it. We've bought into the lies. We need to invert it in our own minds and get other people to invert that in our own minds and put it back to its proper place and its proper pecking order.
Couldn't agree more. I think that everything you're saying is accurate. I think that unfortunately, men especially have abdicated our role. We are not stepping up as the leaders of our households. We're not getting involved in the ways that we could. Much of the organizing is happening by females. Women are doing that hard work, and men should do their part and more. You mentioned organizing earlier. What other things can people do to organize to get more involved that way?
Yeah, so it's really interesting too because I just launched a social media platform called Pickaxe, and it's interesting because I rail on social media quite a bit, but then I've got my own tech company and built my own platform and all that kind of stuff. But it's really interesting because I've been thinking about through all of these things, and I'm like, what is missing with social media that has kept us from being able to organize? The left organizes phenomenally. Like when you think about this, does anybody really believe that tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands of people are showing up to Kamala Harris rallies just organically. No, it's they are organizing in a very effective manner. Now, it's not just all on social media. It's person to person. The thing that the left does phenomenally is they have meetings, in-person meetings constantly. Privately, some small, some bigger. They're actually organizing in their communities. For whatever reason, conservatives are quote unquote organizing on social media platforms. They're going on X, they're going on Facebook, they're going on Instagram, they're going on alternative social media platforms. But the problem is that you have then algorithms that divide us to where you're not actually creating local community. You're creating somewhat of a community across the country, but that's very difficult to actually organize. And also the fact that because we're so splintered off on all these different kinds of platforms, it's really hard to get everybody on the same page. You may or may not see a post, all of that. The thing that we really need to focus on is in-person events. And even for me, with my social media platform, the thing that we're talking about doing post-election is hosting regular in-person, events and rallies and meetings around the country to where we can take the people that are on our social platform, get them in the same room in person, and then we start discussing and debating and getting and working through a lot of these hot button issues to where we can figure out where do we actually unify, because there are a lot of principles that we actually unify on. Even the hot button issues like abortion, you could find consensus on a lot of these issues if you actually get everybody in the same room and to discuss and debate and find our point of commonality. But it's going to take face-to-face interaction. And that's where, for me, even, again, as a social media platform CEO, I'm looking at how do we take people from a social construct where they're on social media and kind of divided, and they get everybody together to where they can have face-to-face conversations, make personal connections. That's really where all of this comes down to. And that's, again, you go back to our founding fathers, freedom of the press and freedom of speech. That was done in your local communities. That was done in your local town square, face to face with people. When freedom of speech was this idea, you could go down to your town square and spout whatever opinion that you had. You could air your grievances. Freedom of the press was not these big corporations that had the right to write down whatever they want in their newspaper. You're a credentialed journalist. It was that you as an individual had the right to write out your grievances against the government, go down to your local printing press, and then distribute it freely face to face in people in your local town square without restriction by the government. And so when you actually think about it, that all hinged on face-to-face, person-to-person contact with people that we're missing now with social media. And so for me, I think that one of the biggest things that we have to do is we have to get as many people as we can in a room time and time and time again, make these personal connections. That's where you create community. That's where you organize. And that's where we actually turn things around.
Very much so. I couldn't agree more. Final question. What it sounds like in this conversation is that so much of our time is spent with celebrity worship, right? When it comes to Donald Trump especially, or whether it's Kamala, we are abdicating. We're giving away our power because there is this celebrity and we're supposed to look up to as if this person is going to solve the problem for us, right? And we talked about just a moment ago practical things that we can do. What's the way that we can begin to affect a cultural mind shift to get more people to think the way that you're thinking about empowering ourselves at a grassroots level and taking back that power at an individual level? How do we begin to change that from a cultural mindset?
So a lot of it will come down to you figuring out what you believe as an individual. Completely, like, separate yourself. And this is the thing that I think that we need to do as a conservative movement, but then also just as American, citizens, is take a step back and take a little time. It's post-election. We don't have a hot button election right now, all that kind of stuff. Let's take a step back and do some self-reflection. What do I actually believe about all these different things, whether it's cultural, whether it's political, whether it's the role of the government, whether it's, what I'm doing on a day-to-day basis? Think through, what do I actually believe? Because I think a lot of people, they're just going through life. They're going to work, they're coming home, they're checking out the news, whatever it is, and then they're following whatever their quote unquote trusted person or entity or group tells them to. If you're a Republican or Democrat, a lot of people, they just fall into line. If you're watching Fox News or CNN, you're just following in line with whatever the headlines or whatever propaganda that they're pushing on you. take a step back and figure out, what do I actually believe? What do I believe religiously? What do I believe politically? What do I believe about the role of the Constitution and the role of the federal government and states' rights and individual rights? And what rights does the government have to infringe upon my rights? Figure out what do I believe about the hot button issues like abortion and transgender? Where's that line? What am I basing it on? If you can start doing that, and then you start off election season with the idea that this is my beliefs. Now I'm going to look at all the different platforms, and I'm going to see which platform most closely aligns with my worldview. And that was a very tough thing for me, especially in this last election cycle, because again, like I said, I've been a Trump guy for more than a decade. But then as I looked at the difference in platforms between Donald Trump and RFK Jr., I realized that my worldview more closely aligned with that of RFK Jr. than of Donald Trump. And so for a period of time, I walked away from the Trump crowd and I endorsed RFK Jr. and I backed him. It wasn't an anti-Donald Trump vote or endorsement by any means, but I realized that my worldview, when it came to big corporations and corruption and corporate capture and the rogue intelligence agencies and the whole deal, was more closely aligned with RFK Jr. So I had to make the tough call, and it was very tough to do in order to back RFK Jr. Luckily now, RFK teamed up with Trump, so now we kind of have this super, dream team of unity, which is amazing and awesome. But that was a very difficult thing that I had to do, but I have to follow my own principles and my worldview, and I encourage everybody to do that. I don't care where that leads you. Figure out what you believe first. Follow that wherever that leads, because you are only accountable to yourself. Don't be manipulated by other people because it's politically expedient or it works for this politician. Your vote is your voice, which means that when you're electing, whether you're voting on a person or a bill in your state or whatever it is, it doesn't matter what the Republicans say. It doesn't matter what the Democrats say. It matters what you believe. What do you believe? Follow that to the nth degree. And I think that, again, that's where we can encourage more discussion and debate and personal responsibility, is when everybody actually believes what they believe because they know what they believe, as opposed to just playing follow the leader.
Well said. I couldn't agree more. I want to thank you for this quick interview and just to ask you, so if people want to follow your work and they want to get more involved in what you're doing, how can they find you?
Yeah, definitely. I'm on all the socials. Just find me at Jeff Dornik. If you want to subscribe to my Substack, that's my newsletter. You guys can go to jeffdornik.substack.com. And then also, you guys can go over to pickaxe.com, Pickax.com. That's my new social media platform. That's my primary hub for social media content. It's where I write all my articles. I post to all of my shows. So you guys can follow me over there. And I encourage you guys to hop on over there. It's a totally constitutionally protected free speech social media platform. You're not going to deal with all the algorithms and the censorship and all that kind of stuff. So make sure you guys are going over there to pickaxe.com. Best place to find me.
Thank you again for your time today, Jeff. This has been great.
Thank you.
Thank you.